So I'm very glad to welcome here Professor Helen Lauer from the University of Ghana. We are running a little late, so I think we're about 20 minutes late, so you'll have until noon, let's say. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
I need 30 minutes to read what I'm going to tell you.
That's perfect. So then we have 10 minutes left for Q&A.
Or whatever.
Okay.
I want to get through it. I have to start off by thanking the organizers for inviting me. It's so appreciated. I wouldn't know how to express the importance of inclusion. I spend a lot of time being excluded, so to be included means a great deal to me, and I'm also not very often in the company of people who are interested in what I want to say. So I hope you'll be extremely critical. I need you very much to be. I also have to express my gratitude to the blind reviewers, because they were spot on. I think I finally know who one of them is because of the notion of well, one of the key concepts is important, and they drew that to my attention, which it'll come out. And the other blind reviewer pointed out that I don't mean non-propositional, and I should have said non-truth functional, so let's just forget about non-propositional, and because I don't want to get preoccupied with what a proposition is. It really is not going to help at all. So we'll talk about non-truth functional commitments in the anatomy of collusion. And I'm not in the PowerPoint generation, so I wrote down a handout on the board. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the terrain I'm going to cover. And I'm going to read to you to give you the most value for the time. Collusion is often used to express opprobrium when describing couples or groups cooperating covertly or secretly to achieve aims that those agents themselves may recognize as morally dubious. Collusion of the sort analyzed here is inherently social. The individuals involved would not venture to pursue such ends entirely on their own, because the particular strategies employed could not be executed rationally except as joint efforts or through surreptitious teamwork. Nor would these endeavors be reasonable to attempt without the expectation of cooperation or tacit consent of others. Collusion occurs within and across hierarchical divisions. For example, suppose the candidacy of a worthy applicant with short stature is undermined by a secretary's intentionally misplacing the applicant's dossier and then disregarding its absence, because the secretary is colluding passively with her boss, whose indefensible aversion to short employees is signaled surreptitiously through pointedly timed grimacing or sighing. I should say that this example comes out of a couple decades of trying to unpack racism in a context where people proclaim civil rights and respect and equality. The secretary's vertical collusion becomes assertive when she initiates of her own accord preparation of the interviewing schedule in a way that delays attention to an excellent short candidate until after the deadline, and prioritizes the application of the boss's tall nephew, whose skill set is grossly inadequate. The search committee chair, aware of this maneuver, colludes vertically and passively by doing nothing to avert the sabotage. Then he colludes horizontally and assertively with other committee members by orchestrating their conduct during interviews in a way that undermines the performance of the short applicant with a barrage of intimidating questions and humiliating banter. The committee scrutineer, witnessing the discriminatory treatment, colludes passively by not reporting it. In consequence of the collusion overall, the short applicant's prospects are defeated. My aim here is to illuminate and account for the apparent divergence of collusion from other sorts of rational collaboration, but not so as to cast it in a unique light or as an isolated category of collective endeavor. On the contrary, I hope to show how the social environment itself may contribute directly to rationally cooperative intentional behavior of many sorts, and how the environment in turn gets shaped by accretive repeated episodes of dogmatic norm following, both covert and overt. And out of respect and deference to the anonymous redder, I want to say that throughout this discussion, I use the terms intention and intentional, always and only to connote episodes of action that are motivated or attempted in ways that would be wrong to characterize as unwitting, reflexive, automatic, or absent-minded. Of course, it does not follow, in this sense of acting intentionally, that an agent can intend or know everything or even anything that actually comes about as the causal effect of what he or she thinks or intends herself to be doing. So, with that caveat, understanding the intentionality that underlies collusion may help to illuminate socially accepted hypocrisy and to explain why sometimes it makes so little difference to the recalcitrance of a social injustice whether the individuals who perpetuate it approve explicitly of doing so or not. The considerations assembled here may also help to account for the typically sluggish and slow pace of a social reform, despite its enjoying ostensibly wide commitment and support. The account proposed, I want to acknowledge where I'm coming from, follows from suggestive leads of researchers in cognition and anthropology, including Tyler Burge, Jonathan Cohen, Nancy Kansian, who's an anthropologist, and also stigmergic epistemology, that's the knowledge acquired through the cooperative behavior in social animals, especially insects. And I think this, Professor List would have some experience with this swarm theory, which is also looking at the way robots function without a central source of information flowing. And thanks to the Vedder, Amadeo Conte's notion of nomotropism, as it has been applied to urban policy analysis by Chiodelli and Moroni. And I'm very grateful for the reference to that paper. The content of beliefs now constitutive of collusion. Models of collective action received over the last 3 decades have characterized individual agents participating either in A, large-scale ongoing institutional development coordination like the stock market or football tournaments, or on the other hand, B, small-scale episodic collaborations like taking a walk, painting a room together. Now here, for lack of time, I have to skip a detailed inventory of these examples and their characteristics as viewed by seminal contributors to this literature, including our keynote Margaret Gilbert, also Michael Bratman, Christopher Kutz, Searle, Tollefson, Turner, Tuamela, and Veltman. But I can return to those examples in the question and answers if you want. So, getting on with it then, the sorts of clandestine collaboration featured in my essay here are not captured by these theorists. Contrary to the models depicting cooperation on a massive scale, for instance, the number of passive or active agents participating in a covert operation is usually small. Nonetheless, collusion definitely belongs among the institutionally dependent collaborations that require of participating agents an intimate working knowledge of the bureaucratic arrangements and structures which they exploit. Yet, unlike the essential allegiance to norm following attributed to collaborators in models of the large scale, the mark of a colluder is to presuppose a prevailing habit of fidelity to protocol which they themselves flout. And this is, of course, why the anonymous reviewer, to whom I'm indebted, recognized the importance for me of Chiodelli and Moroni's work on the complex relation between rules and transgression, and to which I'm going to return later. To be feasible, then, collusion relies upon the resiliency of the very institutional structures which participants in the collusion betray, actively or passively. For example, it's only because colluding committee members know that job interviews are generally regarded as reliable and fair threshold indicators of professional demeanor and temperament that they could rationally expect to destroy an applicant's chances by surreptitiously sabotaging his interview performance. Similarly, it's only because of the Secretary's astute know-how in the conventions of office procedure and her confidence in co-workers' adherence to that office protocol, and her belief that she enjoys tacit respect in the office environment, that she can rationally assume the power to disqualify or dissolve an unsuspecting applicant's competitive edge by tampering with his interview date. On the other hand, in the models of group group projects on a smaller scale, like painting a room or taking a walk, some theorists assume that collaborators must have each other's particular intentions and expectations in view in order to capture their activities as joint efforts. Bratman does this, Kutz. But with respect to passive colluders, it would be wrong to suppose that knowing what to do must involve caring or having beliefs about the specific expectations and subplans of other individuals involved in a collective covert operation at a particular time. Or indeed, now to refer to Gilbert, you don't need to hold impersonal generalizations about others involved in a collusion as a collectivity. Consider, for example, the overseeing scrutineer who played the most crucial part in the sabotage of the short interviewee. He knew that looking the other way was just what he was expected to do, but not because he held true propositional beliefs describing any specific expectations or intentions of those individual committee members who orchestrated the irregularities which occurred at that particular interview, nor because he held more general beliefs about his co-conspirators as a group. This point applies just as well to those who proactively initiate a collusion. So the secretary who undermined one short interviewee's chances by perverting his appointment date, and who destroyed the application process of another by suppressing his file, executed her subplans with the sole intention of winning a promotion for herself and a permanent place in her boss's good books. Even if her co-workers failed to sideline these short applicants, or if they were never able to get the tall nephew hired, the outcome of these specific collusions that she herself intentionally helped to instigate need not have mattered to her. For in the event of their failure, she believed she would try something else to win the boss's favor. Indeed, she might rationally sustain a calculated disinterest in those outcomes in order to absolve herself of blame for any untoward consequences of the office staff's covert mischief. Toward this end, it would be rational for her to remain wholly indifferent to the interests of other colluders, either individually or impersonally as a group, upon whose cooperation the success of her part in the subterfuge was fully dependent. And that's contra Bratman and what I read in Gilbert. Nonetheless, commitment to collaboration is the essence of successful collusion. Given the antecedent conditions in this case, a highly qualified short applicant getting the shaft that is being rejected, and the inept nephews getting hired would not be interpreted correctly as the convergent effect of merely coincidental events resulting from independent parties simultaneously pursuing their isolated self-interests. Yet that is exactly how a third analytic approach would treat these disappointments and rejections. Nominalists like Michael Levin attempt to demonstrate that losing the prize, no matter how often, is the probabilistic outcome of discrete incidents where fair competition occurs between self-interested individuals operating in isolation, legitimately relying upon their own atomized potentials, gained through rightfully earned or inherited personal virtues and capacities. But this lean model of biased meritocracy obfuscates the manifest correlation between prevailing patterns of inequity throughout certain societies and instances of successful collusion, which do involve individuals' intentional participation. Yet the intentions involved may not constitute the fulfillment of a specific goal of any plural subject, nor individuals' personal commitments to shared group intention. People in collusion may be committed to an outcome that none of them would pursue without the other's commitment or endorsement, yet not because they share thoughts with any specifiable content which constitutes the object of shared commitment or tacit consent. Nor would it be rational for colluding agents to be prepared to mutually express or concede what they are up to. To show this, first we need to consider in more detail how social facts may function directly in causal sequences constituting rational collective agency. In particular, we need to appreciate the variety of ways that a collective intentional action is gauged or calibrated as rational in light of many different kinds of norms. And these considerations independently support Chiodelli and Moroni in replacing the familiar concept of rule following with a more inclusive trait, nomotropic, to characterize an episode of behavior as rational because the intention to act has taken into account existing rules, norms, formal statutes, conventions, and protocols. And here, quoting Chiadelli and Moroni, without necessarily following or acting in conformity with them. Momentarily, I will spell out the variant ways that beliefs may contribute to the reasoned intentionality of collaborating agents, for which I introduce a collective utility function that warrants a belief based on its popularity rather than its truth value. The label collective utility is meant to dub just one of the variety of norms of reason that work in tandem with the familiar inductive credence function for determining probability of a belief in direct proportion to the evidence known to exist in its favor. Recognizing that there is a variety of norms effective in causing collaborative intentions allows us to explain how rational agents can embrace dogmatic precepts which are patently false. And it allows us to explain how fully rational, encratic people can do things collectively that blatantly confound the very values they profess sincerely as individuals. Now, to account for this apparent paradox, consider that an outcome which in fact issues from acting collectively in light of prevailing norms is not always a matter which can be read off from any description of the norm itself, nor from the content of any agent's thoughts about what that norm dictates. The causal effects of a norm are indeterminate without considering further the empirical circumstances particular to each situation at hand. For instance, in the story I've been telling, the colluding individuals, anxious to protect their job security, diligently took account of the requisite protocols constituting their company's recruitment interview procedure in order to mimic compliance. Clearly, they did not do so to conform with the formal, ostensibly intended purpose of the company policy. As for the secretary, only by assiduously contouring her handling of applicant portfolios in light of statutory rules was she effective in meeting her own ends, which were commensurate with the covert in-house legacy of excluding short people. The mischief was made possible because of, yet in defiance of, the very anti-discrimination measures that her company sustains to ensure its hiring record remains beyond rebuke. This example demonstrates colluding agents within a complex social environment, reasoning in light of, quoting Chiadelli and Moroni, a meshwork or an entanglement of covert and overt, formal and informal norms, rules, and conventions. So we ask now, how does this complicated kind of commitment work? So we're looking now at norms as features of the social environment. Sometimes, and they don't have to be recognized as part of the thoughts of the individuals. That's what I'm going to try to show now. Sometimes knowledge that contributes essentially to a successful collusion may be about facts constituting the social environment in which the collusion is executed, not about the agents engaged in the collusion. The rational coherence of professing a principle T while colluding with others in behavior that defeats T rests on the fact that an agent may make choices that are causally affected by prevailing norms without necessarily formulating propositional beliefs about doing so. I'll explain this. L. Jonathan Cohen has shown how testable theories of cognitive competence presuppose that logical norms, the norms themselves, not just intuitions or facsimiles of them in the language of thought, but the logical norms themselves are attributable directly to the episodic reasoning of individual human subjects engaged in problem solving. There's research that he alludes to that shows this. Now, following from empirical results such as these, consider that social norms themselves can enter into one's rational choices as well, bypassing truth-functionally contoured beliefs. A social norm or a convention or perceived expectation of others can indicate what to think and how to behave without one's formulating distinguishable propositional beliefs about the information conveyed. Suppose that in conformity with the custom of keeping short people out of my neighborhood and office, I intentionally refuse to share my work schedule or to rent my house to an applicant because she is short. Not because I dislike short people or believe that short people are lazy or that they make bad neighbors. Instead, my refusal expresses my concern to be regarded as a good neighbor or an employee, welcome in the company, together with my awareness that, where I live or work, being a good member of the neighborhood or the office team entails deterring short people from acquiring residence or employment. This is an assessment I make about my neighborhood or my workplace itself. It need not be a belief that refers to any specifiable neighbor or colleague, nor to any differentiable group existing as an entity distinct from the social environments that we happen to share. In a different part of the country, or at a different workplace, or given a different global economic structure, the same neighbors or office staff might well behave very differently towards short people. This consideration suggests that the causal or otherwise normative determinacy entailed by intending to collude is in some sense context sensitive. In formulating and carrying out my intention to non-verbally convey that I am a good neighbor or co-worker, I need not believe an articulable proposition that shunning short people and facilitating nepotism have the desirable characteristics of increasing one's popularity and chances of promotion. I don't need to think that. If I use speech instead to convey the same message, I need not have any beliefs about the sounds or movements I am making in my larynx. I just go ahead and I produce the phonemic sounds as I have learned to make them in the appropriate speech context. Similarly, I may execute an unmistakable rebuff by turning my back abruptly upon receiving a direct query or requesting a request from a short person, without holding a specifiable propositional belief or value judgment about what I think I'm doing. Thereby, my gesture of disdain, in the right context, exhibits the image of myself that I intended. And in the process, this is also important, I'm participating in the collusion required to keep short people at bay. And I do a bit more than that. My exhibition reinforces the status quo of the neighborhood and the office environment that I came to meet, wherein it is acceptable, indeed it's expected, to exclude short people. Together with my avowed convictions that our company is an equal opportunity employer, and that people of short stature are just the sort with whom I want to work and send my children to school, I commit no logical inconsistency through my intentional display of rudeness or my covert sabotage, because the component thoughts comprising my intentionally nasty behavior need not carry properties that could enter into logical relations with each other or with the propositional content of my sincere commitment to principles of fairness, civil rights, and equal opportunity. That I may accept as a policy for a covert norm guiding my behavior the correlation between ostracizing short people and being a good neighbor or co-worker without believing any proposition which expresses that correlation. You find Hector Neri Castaneda contrasts propositions with what he calls practitions. And these, then endorsement of a behavioral pattern, endorsing a behavioral pattern or a norm as rational is always relative to distinct contexts of legitimacy, also from Castaneda, that preclude the agent's individual encounter with what she is doing or with the norm she's following, or for that matter, flouting in their propositional formulation. The force of legitimacy of a norm may vanish with a change in the social environment, not because anyone has changed their propositional beliefs about short people. For example, the legitimacy and so too the incentive for shunning short people may disintegrate if there is a change in the economy and there emerges plenty of jobs to go around. We noticed already that it can be the factual features of the social environment itself that a rational agent must negotiate and which impels conformity on rational grounds. And we saw that this need not involve the agent's own propositional thoughts and judgments about those facts. Typically, when a person stops en route to where he's going in order to avoid passing in front of a moving vehicle, it's because he fears getting hit by a moving vehicle, not because he fears the experience of getting hit by a moving vehicle. Conversely, it's unlikely that by correcting a foolish belief about short stature, I'll be sufficiently equipped either to detonate or bypass or to impede the effects of a dogma that renders it normal and convenient to comply with prevailing covert practices which ostracize short people. Insofar as an agent's intention is to conform to the dictates of political fashion by doing the done thing, be it covert or otherwise, cooperative behavior counts as consummately sensible, demonstrating that social facts themselves can be dominant in the primary reason for acting intentionally, and covert norm following is such a fact. So consider colluding as a rational response to prevailing covert norms. Then, since a rational agent need not approve of the propositional formulation of a norm in order to follow it, colluders may be causally contributing to the perpetuation of a certain kind of social environment without committing themselves to any truth-functional thoughts about doing so. I said that already. Covert norm following may sometimes entail acceptance of a policy which provides the agent a rationally discernible advantage, not because the content of beliefs summoned as the overt basis for that policy are true, nor because such beliefs are derived from the agent's avowed principles for right living, but because those ratifying beliefs are popular. Now, Alistair McIntyre details how normality of the social environment precludes reason-giving for the bulk of our intentional actions, for the bulk of them. I must be aware of the social norm, whether it be official or illicit, in order to follow it, or to circumvent it, or to defy it intentionally. But the content of my awareness of how to do this may be images of activity, or slogans, or emotional states of relative tension or relaxed ease, learned through the body language and facial expressions of parents and playmates. That's how I learned to fear lesbians. My mother got all excited and worried when she saw a couple. People often know how to do what is expected without ever being told explicitly. This may help to explain why it appears to cause so little conventional stir when, as individuals, we avow our belief in principles and personal values on Sunday that diverge from what we practice throughout the week. Rarely is such inconsistency assessed as irrational. Perhaps in a better world it would be. Perhaps in this world it should be, but usually it is not. In and of itself, the social fact that a belief is widely held can be a reliable guide for individual agents choosing to adhere to it, subscribing to the way things are. A belief whose cognitive value rests not on its truth-functional content, but on its stochastic frequency. Fancy way of talking about its popularity is its stochastic frequency of occurrence throughout a population. Such a belief may be referred to as dogmatic. Perhaps analogously to pheromones, the olfactory deposits that are chemically affecting a social insect's environment. Complex phoneme strings may function as intangible fixtures in the social spaces in which we live and work, constituting a plethora of slogans and stereotypes, prejudices, myths, interwoven with and sometimes masquerading as epistemically justified beliefs. Dogma variously provides protection and cohesion. Dogma provides political leverage. Dogma provides consumer incentive, competitive advantage, consolidating influence, solace. It provides social recognition. If dogmatic beliefs form part of the linguistic architecture that shapes the locality in which agents make plans, set goals, and collaborate, then typically an individual's rational intention to conform is composed both of her personal preferences and also dogmatic posits that are knitted into the immediate social environment upon which her existence at least partly depends. This collective interknittedness can be depicted without attributing preferences or commitments to social group entities as specially designed ontological references. reference. Now, just a few more minutes to explain the recalcitrance of the social status quo. This is 2 pages, 3 pages. To spell out more formally the utility of accepting a dogmatic belief, consider a reactionary neighborhood group G, notorious for colluding against short people. Being a hard-nosed conservative, as my membership in G attests, I accept the belief P, let it be, that short people are inherently inferior. But I do so as a die-hard bigot. That is, I give credence to P only to the extent that I thereby endorse the views of at least one other member of my group, G. If no one else believed P, then I would have no rational incentive or warrant for subscribing to P myself. And suppose all members of G use this same standard for assigning subjective credence or collective utility values to their dogmatic beliefs. This would not be the case for other beliefs attributable to members of G, of course, only for those beliefs that might be called dogmatic. To call P a dogmatic belief implies that individual G members uphold P provided they perceive it to be the consensus view of G, not because P is true. In appraising P for its utility as a membership norm in G, its truth value need not enter into the assessment. As a member of G, the only evidence I ever need to warrant my accepting P is the consensual status I have conferred upon it. In other words, P is part of the dogma I embrace because doing so affirms my group identity and solidarity. Because I need not have any propositional beliefs about a policy in order to act in light of it, the same sound string or sequence of marks comprising P can function to signal a membership norm and also, again, in a different context, a propositional belief content. Hence, I can act in accord with the slogan that all short people are unscrupulous and undermine office productivity, while simultaneously embracing the belief that my maid, who is short in stature and looks after my children and my silver, is trustworthy and industrious. Now, P bears a value I am labeling its pure collective utility. If there is no incentive for individual members of G to accept P, other than the fact that they believe other members do. In the absence of new evidence relevant to P, pro or con, the pure collective utility of P accumulates merely with the passage of time, as members of Group G who share an acceptance of slogan P also meet and interact with each other without any cognitive dissonance. If P serves in this way as bonding material to enhance and strengthen membership in Group G, then the objective factual status of P need not contribute directly to calculating its collective utility. On the contrary, if there is any relation at all between P's Bayesian probability and its value in terms of collective utility, it might be inversely proportional. That is, the less there is of neutral and impartial evidence available in P's favor, the more its collective utility increases. P's collective utility increases as the objective counter-evidence and growing opposition mounts in its disfavor, because the more improbable P is at face value, the better it serves as a testament to the group fidelity of a member who accepts it. And so generally, the more improbable P appears, the better it serves to indicate the resilience of G's group solidarity, demonstrated by G members' adherence to P in the face of all opposition. Thus, that's what the kick of doing hooliganism. I mean, your activity is obviously propelled by a nonsense concept, but everybody agrees with it in the face of the police and society as a whole and everybody. Thus, dogma is tenacious, but it is also fickle. Being a good member or office mate, like being a good American, may entail despising short people one year and courting their favor the next. The membership norms of my group will change as people sense that others have a new image of what good G neighbors and employees do, not because anyone has learned new facts about short people. And one paragraph in conclusion. If the considerations assembled here are tenable, they should help us to analyze how social injustice gets tolerated and perpetuated through covert means, by members of privileged groups who individually regard principles of fairness and equity as sacrosanct. This is not to say that membership norms are indelible, nor that collusion is rooted in genomic preference, nor that historically inherited social norms are evolutionarily optimal. On the contrary, this analysis suggests that correcting unjust and inequitable collaboration requires a change in the social architecture comprised of linguistic noise, influencing normal conduct and partly shaping the rational choices that individuals find advantageous. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we are on time. So, questions? Yeah, please.
Thank you, Helen, for this wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Ferocious, very ferocious. But I welcome it as a piece of work which links up nicely with mine.
Yes, it
In a
does.
sense that a thing which I couldn't expand upon in my talk, the deplorable consequences of accepting various beliefs uncritically or for the wrong reasons. This is the topic of yours.
No, I think that you accept wrong beliefs for the right reasons, because you have to. An example
So
in
it's
where
even
I'm
worse.
coming from is the idea that AIDS is sexually transmitted. And that's there's no research that shows that. But if you deny that, you will be in trouble. You could lose your job if you're a virologist.
So accepting the wrong beliefs for right reasons. It's
For
like
the,
adding-
because of coercion,
because of coercion, yes.
as you described.
It's like adding insult to injuries. Thank you.
Thank you, this was extremely interesting. So here I have one question of clarification. So the phenomenon that you are describing is something that, let's say, essentially inheres in group dynamics. And the reason why I'm asking is that, there is evidence that children by the age of 8 or 9 start to develop a so-called theory of social mind, meaning that they acquire certain skills of how inclusion and exclusion in groups are regulated. So one clear example of that is the so-called black sheep effect. So the black sheep, according to the black sheep effect, if a member of your group is loyal, then he is evaluated better than a loyal member of an out-group. But if an unloyal member of your group, belonging to your group, is evaluated, it is evaluated by the in-group members by far worse than an unloyal member of an out-group, right? So, and these are things that children start to learn by the age of 8 or 9. So, the question would be again, are these phenomena that you are after sort of inherent to groups and group
Yes,
dynamics?
I want to stress that the children learn that in the playground.
Yeah.
They don't learn it because they read it in a book or because their mother taught it to them. So this learning is something that we inhere and engage in our activity and our behavior, and it can be completely inconsistent with what we are taught to believe and our principles and what we tell each other. And that is the nature, that's what I'm trying to explain or look at, the structure of inherent hypocritical environments like the one I grew up in. Extremely affluent, I learned all about civil rights, but there was no black in sight. They couldn't buy real estate where I lived, So how is it that we perpetuate injustice, and at the same time, the elite of the society that does this are completely consistent in their respect for justice, and I'm trying to look at how that is possible. It's not an example of a crazy.
Yeah.
It's not an incoherence. So why not? That's what I'm trying to look at. So yes, what children learn, they learn in a lot of ways that are not going to engage logical relationships.
Yeah.
Am I making sense?
Yes, of course, not. Just maybe to push my question further, are these social psychological processes that you are describing, or are these contingent blameworthy action that can occur.
Well, can you distinguish a person's action from however they learn to be socialized? I don't see the contrast that you're drawing. I beg your pardon.
Okay. No, well,
I mean, my actions are a consequence of my social conditioning, let's say, right?
maybe we can. Yes.
I'm missing the point.
Yeah,
Just a follow-up, maybe, I mean, were you asking the difference between a universal topological truth and a cultural one? Maybe.
Yeah. So.
Well, we learn as universal. We can't avoid learning through culture.
So it seems that, for instance, to identify with a group, a silent by-effect of identifying with a group is to develop biases, right? For instance, there are plenty of studies that says that people are more able to empathize with in-group members rather than with out-group members and things like that. This has to do with our psychology, right?
Yeah.
Now you might want to say, so the point that I would like, the question is, are these psychological processes inherently blameworthy? So, do I have...
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I think so.
Inherently, that's a good question. But it's very different than anything I've thought about.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your talk. There are some minor conceptual issues I'd like to discuss with you. And maybe a general problem lying beneath. The two minor issues are, would you say that since passive colluders or passive collusions cannot be described by means of individual intentions, would you say that it does make sense to distinguish joint commitments that allow for an intentionalist description and shared agency, which would include those social processes you are interested in?
Wait, so you want to distinguish, you're asking me if I'm distinguishing shared agency from joint commitment. I think that what I was observing was that people in a collusion, involved in collusion, were jointly committed to keep the short person out. But that's not something that any of them would endeavor to do alone. And they wouldn't even be provoked or motivated to do it alone. It's because of the social environment that I'm in that I learned to exclude short people and do it. Okay, so in the sense that, and what I also think is important is that my motivation has nothing to do with short people. It's because I want to get the boss to like me, and I'm worried about my job. So I'll do whatever the hell that takes, strip, naked, whatever, you know. It doesn't matter the content of the norm itself to me. I just learned to do what is the right thing to do to meet my ends. So I've got ends, all right. I'm an intentional creature, and I'm in it for, if you like, the money. But not by reading off the behavior in propositional descriptions. Am I making sense?
Yes. I'm just wondering...
So passive intentionality is involved there, yeah.
Yes,
that's what
my general
okay.
question. But the first one just tried to figure out what sharedness could stand behind these collusions. Maybe it is at a meta level that everyone wants to meet his or her ends, whatever it costs and whatever it involves.
Well, yeah, but it's important to see that you wouldn't do this. You do whatever it takes in the social context to meet your ends, right? Mm-hmm. So my end is not to discriminate against short people. I have nothing against short people. I like short people. My maid is a short person, you know. But I'm going to do what I need to do in this office space in order to get what I need to do. And I'm going to do it with people whose involvement, engagement, and commitment I require, and yet I have no interest or awareness of what they're up to. You see what I mean? And the other thing I think is important to notice is that what I mean by passive collusion is the sort of thing where people just tolerate what's going on. Are you with me? I mean, they do nothing to stop it. And that's collusion. That's the essence of collusion. So, and they're intending too. They're not doing it by accident. It's the scrutineer didn't overlook the sabotage at the interview because he didn't notice it. He's very conscientiously keeping it quiet that this is going on. And that's how discrimination works. That's what I'm trying to look at, the anatomy of collusion. So maybe I'm not getting exactly what you're worried about. We can talk later.
Yeah, I would say like last two questions and then we'll move on. We're waiting run too late. Please.
There's one here.
Here as well as here.
This is on point. Is it on point?
On point, Margaret.
Yeah, this is just a quick follow-up, actually. It's on point. So, no, so I think you said in response to Sonia that there was a joint commitment in collusion. I don't know if you meant to say that, but I just want to sort of add a point. So I thought it was very nice the way you talk about mimicking compliance, so your actions are beyond review from the point of view of a sort of explicit norm. And I wondered whether this would be a matter of explicit versus implicit, if you could allow for joint commitment at the sort of sub-rosa level, whereas you've got, we're all acting quite as we should in terms of the explicit norm, but we're also colluding to not be non-discriminatory. We're being discriminatory, but we've got these explicit non-discriminatory norms. But there could be an underlying implicit, non-discussed joint commitment.
Absolutely.
So is that
I'm sure
what
that,
I'm
yes.
just following up from something
Yeah.
because Roberta was wondering, is it a joint commitment? So it might
Yes.
be explicit versus implicit or something like that, or levels in which
I
one is
absolutely
subverting the
certain
other.
of that.
You're okay with that? Okay.
Completely,
Okay.
completely. That's the point I'm trying to make. And that the models that I read about joint commitment, either on a small scale or a large scale, leave out aspects of collusion as a particular
Right.
example of joint commitment.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's all I'm up to.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd also like to comment on the normative lessons that we can learn from recognizing these social psychological effects. So, yeah, in the first place, it is indeed important to recognize that there are these powerful social psychological effects among human beings to identify more strongly with people who are perceived as in-group than with people who are perceived not as in-group. There are strong conformist incentives in many social settings, and furthermore, there are often practical, non-epistemic reasons for going along with endorsing certain beliefs, even though epistemic considerations are disregarded or point even in the opposite direction. So I think the first step is indeed to recognize and understand the nature of those social psychological effects. And of course, we regret that there are those effects, but they seem to be very powerful and present wherever there are human societies. So then the normative question is, what can we do in the face of this? And I think here institutional designers have an important job to do. We can recognize, as you point out, that these effects are context sensitive in the sense that how exactly they manifest themselves and how badly they undermine good functioning of various procedures depends very much on the details of the institutions, of the social setting, and some institutional designs might mitigate those effects, while other institutional designs might amplify or worsen those effects. And sometimes it can be even a subtle institutional difference that determines to what extent conformism is encouraged or conformism can be broken. And I just wanted to suggest one piece of literature that you might find of interest here. So the legal theorist Cass Sunstein from the US has written several things on conformism and dissent in societies. I think he's written a book titled something like Why Societies Need Dissent, in which he reviews a large volume of social psychological evidence on conformist effects in various institutional settings, and he thinks there are important epistemic epistemic benefits from dissent and from having institutional mechanisms that encourage dissent. I mean, this is a thought that already goes back to John Stuart Mill on the epistemic benefits of diversity in society. And so I'd just like to suggest this as potentially relevant sources of material. On those.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. The point you're making, I've developed, I'm reacting to people who treat race as a social construction, but think it can be gauged away through Kantian wider reflective equilibrium. So if I could ever get people to change their beliefs about black people, then we would end racism. And I'm suggesting that that's not going to make sense. And you have to look at the social context in which the racism is going on and maybe change the economic structure so that would eliminate people's need to discriminate against anybody. So yes, your point is well taken. I couldn't go into that. Can't say everything. Thank you for this reference.